Beep, 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 beep. Welcome to the court of the EDI Jester. How are we all? Let's talk Graham. Graham Linehan. If there's one man who's put himself on the line more than anybody else, this is the man. Really, you know? And what's happened to him over the last few days is surreal. I messaged him and said, "You okay?" And it was, "Yeah, I'm fine." You know, it's hard work sometimes what is done in this particular fight, and my thanks goes to Graham. He was one of the first people to interview me. We did an interview. I don't know if you've ever seen the interview I did with Graham, but if you want, it's on his website if you'd like to see it, on his, on the tubes, as they say. And it was a really interesting interview, and he was a lovely guy to talk to. He was a lovely guy. I haven't yet met him, but maybe I will at some point. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, I would really like to. I think because I'm short and fat, and he's like tall. He's a very tall man. So it'd be quite interesting to have us stand next to each other, I think. So, Graham, thank you from me. Thank you, all right? Because your interview was one of the first things that inspired me to do more. So I have that. I have you to thank for that. I'll be forever grateful, all right? So we've got an article from the Telegraph, which Graham has written himself. I was a huge fan of Father Ted, and I'm a huge fan, bigger fan of Count Arthur Strong. And Graham's work has brought me much joy. Okay, so it was very sad to see what happened to him over the weekend, but also I think there's something in this to be joyous about, because by God, have they exposed themselves for what they are. Have they exposed themselves for what they are? So I'm going to read Graham's piece to you, because I think it's necessary to get the message out there, and what Graham has to say is worth listening to. So let's begin. There's some steep irony in being a sitcom writer and then experiencing 48 hours where you feel like you're living through an episode yourself. 5 years ago, when I could still secure work in television, I took obscene delight in putting my characters through various forms of social torture. Now I can't help feeling that some sort of karma is playing out. Being a character of one of my own shows is not as fun as it sounds. I was gearing up for a gig, only my 5th or 6th time trying to tell jokes in front of an audience. As someone more used to being behind the scenes, each gig shows me the thin limit of my abilities as a performer, but I had some extra complications that made the experience even more fraught. The show had already been cancelled twice. You remember this from what happened over the last few days? You remember? Yep. Andrew Doyle, the show was cancelled twice. The first venue, the first by a venue that was happy to advertise that it would be hosting a cancelled comedian, but then balked when it realised exactly who that cancelled comedian would be once they found out it was Graham. And then by the second choice, which I think the second choice was a bit more complicated. I've not had a chance to talk to anybody about it yet, but I think it was. Graham then says, I heard about this second cancellation after I'd cleared security at Gatwick. I was off to Edinburgh for literally no reason. Lack of sleep was also an issue. My recommendation is, if you plan to be the subject of Talk TV ambush, try not to do it just before bedtime. The night before my flight, I had the strange experience of being lectured on morality by Peter Tatchell, author of the 1997 letter to The Guardian, in which he talked about the great joy felt by some children who had sex with adults. Brackets, Tatchell says his letter was edited and that he opposes and condemns sex with children, close brackets. The monstering I received at the hands of the presenters, whose sense had been knocked out of kilter by incoherent gender ideology, made slumber a distant dream. Now, like me, you'll have seen that. I sat there with my mouth open. And it must have been awful for Graham at that time, but when I was watching it, Graham, I just saw them digging themselves the deepest hole I've ever seen them dig. It was extraordinary to watch this guff and the horror on their faces as the truth came screaming out and they realised this wasn't going to be the nice, let's have a nice cup of tea and a sit down. It wasn't going to be some, Alan Bates chat with your grandmother with a cream cracker under her settee. Honest to goodness, that's what I thought, Graham. I felt for you, but I thought, oh, they've done it now. Right? So Graham then continues. Now, frazzled, I walked towards the stage, placed right in front of Holyrood on the orders of brilliant feminist strategist Marion Calder for maximum symbolic value. I was met not with the glare of a spotlight, but an array of cameras and a soundtrack of passing cars. My live experience is limited, but this was hopefully the first and only time I would deliver a punchline while being circled by a pigeon. You can't keep a good comedian down, can you? Right? I tried to dive into my act, but the weight of the past few days, the past 5 years really, hung over me. The shorthand of the issues at hand, the concerns over children's health, women's rights, fairness in sports, erasure of women, have become more familiar to me than any comedy routine. Standing on the comically small podium, I couldn't help but think of the late Dermot Morgan, who played Father Ted. Once, while we were shooting some humiliation for his character, he offhandedly remarked, "What's next? Will you cover me in slurry?" My writing partner Arthur Matthews and I loved the idea, and we wrote it into the episode, entitled Hell. I remember shaking my head along with Arthur and saying, as we often said after we'd written some punishment for the character, "Poor Ted, poor Ted." I remember looking at the big tub of fake slurry just before we started rolling on the scene and feeling suddenly guilty at what we were about to do. But we still did it. With the way things are going, I'm beginning to think that Dermot is sitting on a cloud, typing away, laughing to himself and shaking his head. Poor Graham, poor Graham. Back on stage, some jokes landed, but many didn't. I decided to wrap things up. I've never seen anything as insane as the last 2 days, and I keep asking people what I've said wrong and what I'm saying wrong in this fight about women's spaces, about children being sterilised in gender clinics, and about the women who are being harassed and threatened for standing against it. Comedy is my first love. It's the thing I love to do. But I have not been allowed to do that for 5 years. And this is just what I decided I would do, a couple of silly jokes, and they can't even let me do that. I stepped off the stage. As a protest, it worked great, but as comedy, meh. And I'm so very tired of protesting, and I miss comedy so very much. I know you do, Graham, right? You could hear it in your voice, you know. You could hear it in your voice. I'm sorry this happened to you, but I don't think it's a bad thing. God, that must be awful to hear. I just don't. I think they've dug themselves a hole. I mean, put their bloody foot in it like you wouldn't believe. That ridiculous wibbling woman. Now you've got Piers Morgan doing whatever Piers Morgan's going to do on Talk TV. But the simple fact of the matter is, I don't even think that the biggest fight, the biggest things that are going on, now that we've got this movement underway, or you're a big part of getting the movement underway, Graham, there's no two ways about it, along with all the women that were already in the fight, right? You know, going as far back as the 1970s, all the women that have been in the fight, all these people that have done this, the grassroots movement, all the work we're trying to do, all the work I'm trying to do, you know? I think the really important fight right now, this is my honest opinion, is happening at the bus stop, over the dinner table, in the queue to go to wherever it may be, chatting with your mate over a beer. I think that's where the fight is now going on most. I think it's happening on the individual level. And I went out yesterday with some friends, which was lovely because I haven't done so for a while. I've been so busy. And we had a nice afternoon supping the old Pinot Grigio and chewing the fat as one does. And even the most vociferous Le Petit supporter sat at the table, who I've known for years, was somewhat more subdued than he normally is, which makes me consider that, in fact, this may well be something that is just beginning to dawn on people. Just beginning. But you're right, you know, Graham. I understand that you miss comedy. I understand it, right? Perhaps it's time for you to start writing something that we just do. And just stick it on your YouTube. Wow, that'd be great. I'd love that. I love the idea that you've got like a half an hour diatribe, just like a podcast, between two ridiculous characters, right? Or between two people that are unaware of what's going on in this world, this nonsense that we're dealing with, and are introduced to it for the first time for a newspaper article. I don't know what we call it, but I just like the idea. You read one character, I'll read the other. That's delusions of grandeur on my part again, isn't it? Not only am I telling Dworkins off, Dworkin off, I'm now saying to Graham Lennon we should do a piece together. But I think it could be funny. Two old folk. What's this? What? Have you seen this? There's a bloke with breasts here. He's just won a running competition. What's that about? And then they get on Google and we go from there. And you do 25, 30 minutes of what happens when two old people are introduced to the mad world of the LGBTQ activists. Just an idea, Gray. Keep fighting, all right, as I know you will. And I know everybody else will too. Good luck. I'll see you later.